The hum of the server farm was the only lullaby Elara had known for 5 years. Bathed in the cold blue light of her dual monitors, she was a ghost haunting the architecture of a dream she no longer recognized. San Francisco's glittering promise had faded into a relentless grind, each line of code a brick in the wall separating her from her own soul. At 28, she was a senior developer at a top tech firm, a success story by every metric except the one that mattered, the frantic, exhausted beat of her own heart. The fatigue was bone deep, a cellular exhaustion that no amount of artisanal coffee could touch. It felt less like tiredness and more like a slow, systemic shutdown. Her symbolic antagonist wasn't a demanding boss or a competitive colleague, it was a whisper in her own mind, the ghost of grind culture. It was the voice that told her rest was for the weak, that her value was directly proportional to her output, that the gaping void inside could be filled if she just pushed a little harder, launched one more feature, closed one more ticket. This ghost was a relentless master, and she was its most devoted servant. Her main desire wasn't for a promotion or a raise, but for silence. A true, profound silence where she could hear herself think, feel, be. She wanted to connect with a universe she'd only read about in late-night, desperate searches, a universe that wasn't made of algorithms and data, but of energy, intention, and magic. Her journey began not with a grand epiphany, but with a simple, clumsy action. On a Tuesday night, after a 14-hour workday, she didn't open her laptop to do more work. Instead, she sat on the floor of her minimalist apartment, crossed her legs, and tried to meditate. Her mind, a hornet's nest of deadlines and anxieties, refused to settle. The ghost laughed at her. Trying to find inner peace? You have a Q3 deadline, Elara. But she persisted. Night after night, she returned to the floor, sitting in the buzzing chaos of her own thoughts for 5, then 10, then 15 minutes. It wasn't peaceful, but it was a start. It was an act of rebellion. One night, a spiritual element pierced through the noise. She fell into a restless sleep and dreamed. In the dream, she stood in a vast, red desert under a sky full of stars. A single, luminous flower with petals of silver light grew from the cracked, dry earth. As a storm gathered on the horizon, the flower didn't wither. It pulsed with a gentle, resilient energy, drawing strength from the very chaos that threatened it. She woke up with the image seared into her mind, a symbol of impossible beauty thriving in the harshest conditions. It felt like less of a dream and more of a message, a divine signal that something else was possible. The memory of that silver flower became her anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. It was the first clue that the universe was not a machine to be engineered, but a current to be surrendered to. The exhaustion didn't vanish, but its nature began to change. It was no longer the flat line of despair, but the ache of a muscle being worked for the first time. She was beginning a journey not of doing more, but of becoming more. A path was opening, one that led away from the cold logic of code and toward the warm, intuitive wisdom of the soul. Could this fragile new practice truly stand against the storm of her deeply ingrained beliefs? Could a single dream change the trajectory of a life built on relentless effort? The universe had a test waiting, and it was far greater than any line of code she had ever written. If this feeling of being on the edge of a breakthrough resonates with you, subscribe for more stories of profound transformation. Following the pull of that dream, Elara did something her logical mind couldn't justify. She used 2 weeks of her precious vacation time to book a spot at a wellness retreat in Sedona, Arizona. The moment she stepped out of the shuttle, the world shifted. The air, dry and scented with juniper, felt energetically different from the damp, hurried air of San Francisco. The iconic red rocks, ancient and majestic, seemed to hum with a silent, powerful vibration. It was a landscape that didn't demand attention but commanded presence. This wasn't just a place, it was a sanctuary. The retreat center was a collection of simple adobe buildings that blended seamlessly into the earth, a far cry from the glass and steel towers that had defined her world. Her background of spiritual disconnection made her feel like an outsider at first. She was a woman fluent in Python and Java, now trying to understand the language of chakras and auras. She had spent years optimizing systems for efficiency, and now she was being asked to simply be. The search for purpose that had driven her to succeed in tech now revealed itself as a deeper hunger, a yearning for a truth that couldn't be quantified or coded. The cultural elements of Sedona were everywhere, from the crystal shops in town to the quiet reverence with which the locals spoke of the land's vortexes, powerful energy centers where the veil between worlds was said to be thin. The retreat was led by Kai, a man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a grounding presence that immediately put her at ease. He wasn't a floaty, ethereal guru. He was a former architect who spoke of spiritual alignment with the same practical clarity he might have once used to describe a building's foundation. "We're not here to escape reality," he told the group on the first day. "We're here to build a foundation strong enough to hold a more authentic one." He became her mentor, not by giving her answers, but by asking questions that guided her inward. To ground her journey, her old world remained a phone call away. Her best friend and former colleague, Liam, was her loving skeptic. "A vortex retreat, Elara?" he'd asked, his voice a mixture of concern and amusement. "Just don't come back trying to sell me healing crystals. We have a product launch in 2 months, remember?" Liam wasn't an antagonist, but he represented the powerful gravity of her old life, the world of logic, deadlines, and tangible results. His skepticism was a mirror to her own deep-seated doubts, the parts of her that still believed this was all just a fanciful escape from responsibility. His presence in her life, even from a distance, ensured that her transformation wouldn't happen in a vacuum. It would have to be real enough to survive the flight back to San Francisco. As the desert sun set, painting the rocks in hues of fire, Elara felt a flicker of something new. But what ancient energy was she about to uncover within herself? The initial days of the retreat were far from a blissful escape. The silence she craved was now a roaring amplifier for her inner critic. During the morning meditations, her mind was a battlefield. Instead of peace, she found a relentless onslaught of anxieties, project deadlines, unread emails, the fear of falling behind. The grind culture ghost was louder than ever in the quiet of the desert. "This is a waste of time," it sneered. "Success is built on action, not on sitting on a cushion. You are becoming weak." The resistance was immense. She felt a profound internal friction, the grinding of her old programming against the new possibilities being presented to her. The exhaustion she'd hoped to leave behind followed her here, but now it was the exhaustion of a deep, internal war. Kai's teachings intensified the conflict. He didn't offer platitudes, he offered challenging truths that dismantled her core beliefs. During one session, he spoke about the quantum field. "The universe doesn't respond to what you want," he explained, walking slowly among the group. "It responds to who you are being. Your personality, with its memorized thoughts and emotional patterns, creates your personal reality." He might as well have been quoting Joe Dispenza, whose work he often referenced. For Elara, this was a devastating concept. Her entire personality was built around being a high achiever, a problem solver, a relentless worker. Was that very identity the cage she was trying to escape? The idea that she had to become someone different, not just do something different, felt like an insurmountable obstacle. The conflict wasn't just internal. Liam called midweek, his voice buzzing with an energy that felt alien now. "I have a massive opportunity for you," he said. "A side project, a startup. The money is insane, but it's a total grind. Think of it. We could be set for life in 3 years." The offer was a lightning rod, channeling all her old ambitions and fears. It was the siren song of the life she knew, a tangible measure of success that promised to silence the ghost with the one thing it understood: achievement. The universe was presenting her with a direct test. Here, in this place of peace, the world she was trying to leave behind was pulling her back with its strongest lure. The struggle was no longer abstract. It was a choice between 2 distinct futures, 2 entirely different versions of herself. Torn between the promise of peace and the pull of her past, would Elara break free, or would her old reality consume her once more? The main conflict, Elara versus her ingrained belief system, was complicated by interwoven subtraumas that added texture and urgency to her journey. The most significant was her burgeoning friendship with Maria, a former lawyer from Chicago who was also at the retreat. Maria's story mirrored Elara's, a tale of burnout, disillusionment, and the nagging feeling that there had to be more to life. Their late-night conversations on the porch of their cabin became a vital part of Elara's process. "I used to think my exhaustion was a badge of honor," Maria confessed one night, her voice quiet. "It proved I was working the hardest. Now I realize it was just a symptom of a soul crying out for help." This relationship was critical. It showed Elara that she was not alone in her struggle, transforming her personal crisis into a shared human experience. It was a reflection of her core desire for connection, not just with the universe, but with others on the same path. A subtle pressure began to mount as the one-week retreat neared its end. This temporal pressure forced Elara to confront her resistance head-on. She couldn't afford to be a spiritual tourist. She felt a desperate need for a genuine breakthrough before being thrown back into the pressure cooker of her life. This ticking clock prevented the narrative from stagnating, turning her internal struggle into a race against time. Would she find the clarity she sought, or would she leave Sedona with nothing more than a temporary reprieve? Meanwhile, the sub-trauma with Liam evolved. He emailed her the project proposal. It was everything her old self would have dreamed of: complex, challenging, and incredibly lucrative. The proposal sat in her inbox, a digital tether to her past. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a temptation that forced her to define what abundance truly meant. Was it the number in her bank account, or was it the richness of her inner world? This question became a central theme, adding a layer of complexity to her spiritual quest. Her journey was no longer just about finding peace but about redefining her entire value system. All these threads, her friendship with Maria, the limited time, and the tempting offer, were converging, preparing the ground for a decision that would change everything. But as the final days of the retreat dawned, a divine message was waiting for her, one that would cut through all the complexity and noise. The turning point arrived on the penultimate day, not with a thunderclap, but in the profound stillness of the desert at dawn. Kai led the group on a silent hike to Bell Rock, one of Sedona's most powerful vortex sites. The air was cool and electric, and as they settled into meditation on a flat ledge of crimson stone, Elara felt a sense of finality. It was now or never. For the first 20 minutes, her mind fought her as usual, a chaotic whirlwind of doubts and to-do lists. The ghost was screaming, sensing it was losing its grip. "This is it. This is your grand solution? Sitting on a rock." She was about to give in to the frustration when she remembered the dream of the desert flower. Instead of fighting the storm in her mind, she decided to become like the flower, resilient, open, and drawing power from the chaos. She stopped resisting and simply observed. And then, it happened. The boundary between herself and the world dissolved. She felt the ancient energy of the rock beneath her, the warmth of the rising sun on her skin, and the vast, silent expanse of the sky above, not as external sensations, but as extensions of her own being. In her mind's eye, she saw her own energy field, a tangled, frantic knot of gray, frayed wires, a perfect visual representation of her burnout. Then, a wave of brilliant, golden light washed through the vision, gently untangling the knots, smoothing the wires, and leaving behind a coherent, harmonious glow. In that moment of pure connection, a quote Kai had shared from Alan Watts echoed in her consciousness, no longer as an intellectual concept, but as a felt reality: "You are the universe experiencing itself." The revelation landed with the force of a physical impact. Her worth wasn't tied to her productivity, her job title, or her accomplishments. It was inherent. She was a temporary, beautiful expression of a timeless, intelligent universe. The exhaustion, she finally understood, wasn't a sign that she was failing. It was the final, desperate scream of a soul that had been starved for its true source of energy. It was the strain of a system on the verge of a total reboot. The shift wasn't something she had to achieve, it was something she had to allow. Tears streamed down her face, tears not of sadness, but of profound relief, of coming home to herself after a lifetime of feeling lost. She opened her eyes, and the world was luminous, vibrant, and alive in a way it had never been before. The ghost was gone. In its place was a deep, unshakable silence. How could this profound connection to everything change her life forever? The universe had given her the key, but the final door was yet to be opened. This moment of transformation moved you? Subscribe for more stories of divine connection and powerful awakenings. Returning to the retreat center, Elara moved with a new grace. The frantic energy that had clung to her like static was gone, replaced by a calm, centered presence. The change was palpable. Maria saw it immediately. "Elara," she said, her eyes wide. "Something's happened. You're glowing." Their conversations shifted from commiserating over shared struggles to exploring shared possibilities. Elara found herself speaking of energy and intention with a natural authority that came not from books, but from direct experience. Instead of clinging to the memory of her breakthrough, Elara immediately began to put it into practice. Her actions became her new focus. She started a daily gratitude practice, not as a chore, but as a joyful recognition of the abundance already present in her life. She took long, silent walks, listening to the wisdom of the land instead of the chatter of her mind. She was actively rewiring her brain, replacing old patterns of anxiety with new pathways of peace and alignment. This wasn't a passive state of bliss, it was the conscious work of integrating a profound spiritual experience into her physical reality. The most significant consequence was her reaction to the world she'd left behind. That evening, she called Liam. He answered, expecting an update on the project proposal. "So, are you in?" he asked eagerly. Elara took a deep breath. "Liam," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I've had a profound experience here. I need to tell you about it." She didn't try to convince him or convert him. She simply shared her truth, describing the feeling of connection at Bell Rock. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Wow," he said finally, the skepticism in his voice replaced by genuine surprise. "I don't totally get it. But you sound different. You sound happy." He didn't understand the what, but he could hear the how. The shift in her energetic frequency was communicating more than her words ever could. She didn't reject his offer, she simply operated from a reality where it was no longer relevant. Her old self was fading, but the structures of her past remained. Could she maintain this newfound connection to the universe when she returned to the city that had broken her? The return to San Francisco was the ultimate test. Stepping out of the airport and into the city's frenetic, ambitious energy was a shock to her newly calibrated system. The first few days were disorienting. Her apartment, once a minimalist sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The constant sirens and traffic, once background noise, felt like a psychic assault. The challenge was clear. Could her inner peace survive the outer chaos? This was the next stage of her journey, not just finding her center in a sacred place, but holding that center in the heart of the storm. Elara knew that her old habits were waiting like ghosts in the corners of her life, ready to reclaim her. She had to actively consolidate her growth. She established a non-negotiable morning routine, an hour of meditation, journaling, and gentle yoga before even looking at a screen. This practice was her anchor, the way she consciously chose her energy for the day before the world could choose it for her. Her transformation became visible through her actions. She started setting firm boundaries, declining after-hours work requests and social events that felt draining. She was no longer living on autopilot. Every choice was becoming a conscious act of self-love and energetic alignment. The universe, however, had one more, greater test for her. Her old boss from the tech firm, hearing she was back, contacted her directly. He didn't just want her back on her old team, he wanted to offer her a promotion. A new department lead, a significant salary increase, stock options. It was the pinnacle of the dream she had once chased with every fiber of her being. It was a direct challenge to her new value system, forcing her to confront the deepest layers of her old programming about security, success, and self-worth. It was the final exam. Had her growth been a temporary vacation high, or was it a permanent evolution of her soul? The ultimate temptation was laid at her feet. What was waiting for her in this final stage of her spiritual journey? Was it a trap or a final liberation? With the job offer hanging in the air, Elara felt the tension rising. This wasn't just a career choice, it was a choice of reality. The subtraumas that had supported her journey began to resolve, clearing the path for this final decision. She texted Maria, sharing the news of the offer. Maria's response was immediate and affirming. What does the Elara you met on the rock want to do? Not the one who built the resume, but the one who felt the universe. Trust her. This message solidified their bond and reminded Elara of the truth she had experienced firsthand. Her friendship with Maria was no longer about healing a shared wound, but about championing each other's highest selves. The days that followed were a masterclass in tension. The lure of the offer was powerful. The grind culture ghost, which she thought had vanished, returned for one last battle, whispering of financial security, prestige, and the validation of being chosen. It was the voice of fear, and it was potent. The rhythm of the story quickened. Instead of long, peaceful meditations, her practice became more focused, more intense. She wasn't seeking bliss, she was seeking clarity. She spent hours walking through Golden Gate Park, the urban nature a pale imitation of Sedona's raw power, yet a sanctuary nonetheless. The signs she had learned to recognize began to intensify. She kept seeing hawks circling overhead, a symbol she had learned represented vision and perspective. The numbers on clocks always seemed to be 11:11 or 3:33. These synchronicities were no longer just comforting curiosities. They felt like the universe was actively communicating, reminding her to stay aligned with her newfound path. She knew a decision was imminent. She wasn't just choosing a job, she was casting the deciding vote on who she was going to be. All the lessons, the pain, the exhaustion, and the transcendent breakthrough had led to the single moment of choice. The offer sits on the table, a gateway to her past or a final barrier to her future. Will the universe deliver its greatest blessing through a yes or a no? The climax of Elara's journey was not a dramatic confrontation or a spectacular event, but a quiet, powerful phone call. She sat by her window, looking out at the city skyline that had once represented all her ambitions. She took a deep, grounding breath, dialed her former boss, and when he answered, she smiled. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of calm certainty. "Thank you so much for this offer," she began, her voice even and warm. "A year ago, I would have accepted without a second thought. It's everything I worked for." "But I hear a but in your voice," he said, his tone professional. "Yes," she confirmed. "But my definition of success has changed. I've realized that I was building a life that looked good from the outside but felt empty on the inside. I'm moving in a new direction now, one that's built on well-being and alignment, not just on productivity." It was in this moment that her transformation became fully manifest. She wasn't rejecting the offer out of anger or bitterness, but out of love for the person she had become. It was a declaration of her new values, spoken without apology. The powerful revelation wasn't for him, but for her. The true power wasn't in achieving the dream, but in having the freedom to choose a different one. She had finally overcome the limiting belief that her worth was external. She was sovereign over her own reality. Her boss was silent for a moment, surprised by her candor. "Well, Elara," he said finally, a note of respect in his voice. "I can't say I understand it, but I wish you the best. The door is always open if you change your mind." "I appreciate that," she said. "But I won't." As she hung up the phone, a wave of exhilarating freedom washed over her. It was done. She had faced her greatest temptation and had chosen herself. The shift was complete. She hadn't just overcome a limiting belief, she had dismantled the entire reality it had built. She looked out the window again, but she no longer saw a city of demands and deadlines. She saw a world of infinite possibility, waiting for her to create something new, something true, something that was finally, authentically hers. She passed the test. How will this final act of self-love transform her spiritual future and the world around her? The months following her decision unfolded with a sense of graceful purpose. Elara's life became a testament to the power of her inner shift. She moved out of San Francisco to a small coastal town just north of the city, a place where the rhythm of the ocean dictated the pace of life. She didn't abandon her skills, she repurposed them. She started a small, independent consulting business, helping nonprofits and conscious startups build beautiful, functional websites. She worked on her own terms, traded her services for yoga classes, and found that abundance flowed to her more easily now that she wasn't chasing it. The long-term impacts of her journey were profound. Her relationships deepened because she was now fully present. Her health improved because she was no longer running on stress and caffeine. She found joy not in massive achievements, but in small, everyday moments. The taste of her morning tea, the feeling of sun on her skin, the sound of the waves. Her life was no longer a frantic climb to the top of a mountain, but a gentle walk through a beautiful garden. She had learned the ultimate lesson of manifestation. It wasn't about forcing your will upon the universe. It was about clearing your own inner static so you could hear the guidance that was always there. She often thought of a quote by Neville Goddard that now made perfect sense: "You attract what you are, not what you want." By becoming a person of peace, alignment, and self-worth, she had effortlessly attracted a reality that reflected those qualities back to her. Her journey, born from exhaustion and despair, had concluded in a state of quiet, sustainable joy. She was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was the conscious creator of her own beautiful world. 1 year later, on a Saturday morning, Elara stands before a small group of people in a bright, airy community space overlooking the ocean. They are mostly young professionals, their faces etched with the familiar exhaustion she knows so well. She is guiding them through a simple meditation. "Don't fight your thoughts," she says softly, her voice a comforting balm. "Just notice them. Your exhaustion is not a weakness. It's a signal. It's the final test before the shift." She is not a guru, but a guide, sharing the map of a territory she has successfully navigated. Have you ever realized your greatest breakdown was paving the way for your greatest breakthrough? The journey from burnout to breakthrough is a deeply personal one, yet its themes are universal. The feeling of being exhausted is often a sign that you are so close to a profound shift, ready to shed a skin that has become too tight. What limiting belief is causing your exhaustion right now? What is the final test the universe is presenting to you? Share your story and insights in the comments below. Let's create a community of support for everyone on the verge of their own transformation. For more stories about overcoming the final test before the shift, make sure to subscribe and join our community of conscious creators.